Hi everybody, this is Mr. Phillips making another screen recording for you to talk about the next essay that at this point you should be just about ready to turn your attention to if you've gotten the second essay turned in, which again you should have, but if not, okay, get that in as soon as possible. But you know the schedule doesn't stop just because you haven't turned in an assignment yet. So I do want to at least get everyone thinking about the third assignment, the third essay, the Core 3 essay. It's about poetry. So let's start talking about that. I am logged into Canvas as always here, so you see the basic home screen. I'm going to click over to the assignments, where obviously we find all the assignments. Again, may or may not look a little bit different for you all as the student. I'm kind of logged in as the instructor or whatever, and this is the arrangement that I see here. But past all these reading journals down into the essays, we're looking at the Poetic Devices essay. So we're going to click on that. Basic layout of all my assignments. I mean, this is the third one you've seen, so you might recognize what it looks like now. So your task, to write an essay in an academic voice. Again, we're back in this academic tone of voice. We're staying in that tone of voice, I should say. Not necessarily that personal tone of voice. Incorporating, as always, analytical techniques to develop a focused idea for a specific audience. Pretty much the same as last time. This is the overall task, what we're doing. And that's really, all of your academic essays in a class like this really is what you're doing. Your purpose, pretty much the same also. This time we're analyzing poetic techniques for their application, their effectiveness, their intent, what the writer, especially when you think about intent, what the writer is attempting to do, why the writer is doing it, what they're hoping to accomplish with the things that they do in their poetry, looking for their effectiveness, how they work, why they work, to what extent do they work, etc. And that is, obviously going to imply some judgment on your side to determine how well or how effectively these things do work in your opinion. Your topic, just like the last time, I'm giving you kind of three subtopics to choose from. Select any one of them, write your essay providing your response. Your response, pretty much by definition, should incorporate quotations from the texts. And again, that should be plurals, texts, the poems themselves that you're writing about, in order to illustrate and support your thoughts, to illustrate and support, to give examples of the points that you are making about poetry techniques. As before, you can perform additional research if you want. You can find interviews with a writer. You can look up additional analyses of these poems if you want. You can, educate yourself as much as you can, as much as you need to about the poems. I, never want to tell you not to research. But just like last time, just quote everything that you do find. You're allowed to use it. I encourage you to use it. Don't find stuff online and then pretend that you didn't. Don't um, learn a bunch of stuff about poetry or about the writer and then shove all this information into your essay and pretend that you were born knowing this information. You're allowed to do research. Just quote it, cite it properly, use your MLA. All such research, if used in your essay, should be properly referenced and documented. Use it. Wow, typo again. How do these things keep happening to me? MLA, not MLF. MLA. I'll fix that. But we can talk about that. It's in your little Seagull handbook and elsewhere, so you can find those MLA guidelines. But definitely, you need to be doing that. So your topics, you're going to be writing about either voice or imagery or symbolism. And just like before, pick one. Don't try to give me three miniature essays, or don't try to treat these as three separate paragraphs within the body of your essay. I want you to write your essay about voice or about imagery or about symbolism, and it's your choice. So read through these three options carefully, think about which one sounds most doable, most approachable, most easiest, if that's the way you want to say it, that sounds most interesting to you. So your first step will be to read through this and maybe pick which topic you want to be doing here. Voice. Select three speakers from any of the poetry readings that we've read in this course, or other poetries from the portable literature textbook. Again, you have the whole textbook at your disposal. I'm requiring or assigning certain poems, but again, I don't want that to be all that you read. I want you to explore your textbook, thumb your way through it, look at the table of contents. Maybe you'll find some other titles that you think could be very useful for this topic. So at least three. Analyze the voice as expressed by the speaker of the essay. The speaker, which may or may not be the same as the actual writer, the author. Who is this person or character or persona speaking the poem? Is it the author, him or herself? And in many cases, you'll determine that that really is the case, that this poem seems to be the actual human being, the actual real life poet speaking to us, almost as in some ways, maybe an autobiographical type poem, or a poem that really does reflect the writer's real life opinions, experiences, perspectives, etc. Some of that you may determine by reading the writer's biography in the textbook or elsewhere. It may be, you may, again, determine this by doing additional research if you want, but to try to see the extent to which this voice does seem to match the voice of the actual real life writer. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just a voice that they adapt or adopt for this poem. They might create what we call a persona, which is kind of almost an artificial personality that may be somewhat similar to the actual writer, but a persona is like a mask that they wear. It's almost a character that they jump into, that they create for purposes of speaking this poem to us. So is this voice the voice of the author? Is it some other speaker that the author has created? To what extent is the poem, as we said, autobiographical? Is there a persona in use? And again, if you need to talk a little or read a little bit more about what a persona is, does this persona provide additional depths or meanings to the poem if it's, if the character is, or the personality is important to the topic, that only a certain type of character would feel this way? That may be part of your determination as you read the poem or poems. Do you find similarities or differences in the voices of the three speakers that you select? So you are selecting the three that you want to write about. Will you choose those three deliberately because they have something in common? Will you choose those three deliberately because they're very different from each other, or because they are, similar to each other in some way? So that's going to be up to you. So again, just pick three, read through the poems, and try to almost diagnose the voice that you're hearing in this poem, the person, persona, character, personality that you imagine speaking this poem to you as the reader. So that would be your voice essay. Your second topic, imagery. Select any three poetry readings or that we've assigned, or anything from the textbook. Again, explore the textbook. Identify the images used in the poems, the images that make you visualize something. Does the image seem to represent something? How does the writer make you visualize? Is it descriptive techniques? Do they, mention keywords that automatically generate some imagery in your mind because it's a common image that we all know about? Is there something specific, the way they do it, the way they describe something, that helps you visualize it? What connotations do particular words have that contribute to these images? The connotations of words, not just the denotations. The connotation is the kind of impact that a word has. Not strictly the dictionary definition, but how we respond to a word. So connotation might be the difference between skinny and slender. Maybe an example that I always use when we're talking about someone's appearance, describing someone as skinny versus describing them as slender or thin or bony. These words have different connotations. They might all somehow mean the same things in terms of weight, but they give different impressions of how you're trying to describe the person. So do the writers use words that have certain connotations in the way, that themselves help you generate an image or make you generate an image? How do these images make a larger point? Is there a point to the way that these writers use their imagery? Are they trying to, use the imagery to make a point about something? Similar kind of sub-question here from the last one. Do you find patterns, similarities, or differences? Again, you are picking these. Are you picking them because they do have similar type images or use similar images? Will you pick them because they are very different from each other? Why are you picking the examples of imagery that you're using? So again, think of the types of images, not just visually describing something. That's fine. That is visual imagery, but there is religious imagery, there's political imagery, there's personal imagery, describing people or very personal things like that. There's nature imagery. So there are types of imagery also that may figure into which poems you select as examples. The third option, symbolism. We frequently associate symbolism with poetry or poetry with symbols or with symbolism. We think about symbols in poetry, individual symbols where this thing represents blah, 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 or the color red represents such and such. So types of symbols also, again, religious symbols, nature symbols, etc. Select any one of the poetry readings, one, or any one poet. So what I'm wanting you to do here is to really dig into the symbols in a poem, a single poem, to give substantial discussion to the symbols in one single poem, not three, or any one poet. And at that point, when you choose any one poet, you probably can talk about multiple poems by that writer, because a writer very often will have patterns in the way he or she uses symbols or other techniques in their writing. So if you choose one particular poet, one writer, you can certainly use a couple of their poems, three of their poems as examples of the way that they use symbols. But I would not want you to pick, three different poems from three different writers. That gets maybe a little bit too cumbersome because there's too much variety. So we are looking for patterns. So look at the poems in any one, or I'm sorry, the symbols in any one poem or any one poet, his or her poetry. Identify the symbols, and again, types of symbols. Think about types of symbols also. What do they seem to represent? Is it pretty clear what this is a symbol for? Could there be any potential varieties of interpretation? Could 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 people come up with 10 different interpretations of that symbol? Or is it pretty clear to any reader, what the symbol is? Do you see patterns again of what types of symbols that the author might use? Does the writer use any allusions? An allusion is a kind of a reference to something that they expect the reader to know about, to allude to something, to mention something that itself, as soon as you mention that thing or that word, it almost triggers this whole variety of information for the reader because they know what you mean and they know what you're talking about when you refer to that thing. So allusions themselves can be symbols because they seem to represent the larger ideas that the allusion triggers for the reader. If you do select a poet, do you find any pattern in their use of symbolism? Talked about that just now. So again, think about symbolism. You're limited here to one poem or one poet. So there's your 3 subtopics here. I said your first step would be to pick a topic. Obviously, your first step is to begin reading some of those poems if you haven't already. So step 1, start reading the poems and think about any of these topics. Step 2 will be to pick a subtopic that you want to be writing about: voice, imagery, or symbolism. Step 3, just like the previous essay, step 3 will be to select the poems that you will, poem or poems that you'll be using as examples in the body of your essay. Step 4 is always the big one: start writing. So we will talk more about this. You'll hear more about this. You'll be reading more about this, and you'll be, if you haven't already, jumping into the discussions about this. When you look at the discussions, and we can do that right here real quick as we come to the end of the recording, the discussions for the poetic devices, looking at the questions, I pretty much have the sample questions for virtually all of the poems. And the ones that I don't seem to, I can plug more sample questions in. But again, these questions are just examples of things to get you talking about. You do not have to answer my questions at all. You certainly don't have to answer all of them, and I hope you don't. I'd rather have substance, so don't just try to give me one sentence about each poem. Give me good, and I say give me, you're giving it to your classmates. Give your classmates good things to respond to. You're trying to generate conversation, you're trying to maintain conversation. Conversation kind of ends when you just say something like, "That was a good post, thanks." Well, okay, but why was it a good post? Continue the conversation. Some basic questions. I don't mind, that you talk about this. Why did you enjoy a poem? Why didn't you? What appeals to you about the poetry? I never want us to get past the point where we're no longer interested in enjoying the poetry. I want us to enjoy the poetry. So be thinking about some of these topics as you read the first round of poems. Your discussion post will be due on Thursday night, your original post. So get going on that. I, again, will provide more information about some of these things. I'm going to pull this recording down, or stop the recording, not pull it, but end this recording and get it uploaded into Canvas as soon as I can. So get started and look forward to more. I will be holding a live class Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock, previously announced, and I hope to see you there. Take care.